Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of NCOPD Live. You have Richard Green here today because the professional SGL is doing something that leaders have to do. He's taking care of himself. All right. So he'll be back soon. But today you have me. All right. So now on this edition of NCOPD Live, we have a special guest, Sergeant Major Carr. Sergeant Major Carr has served in a whole lot of very unique units in the Army. He's a North Carolinian. He has children and he is married. Okay. So he is also the Sergeant Major of the SDDC, and he's here today to talk to us about leadership, sustainment, and things that, how the SDDC works for the Army. All right. So, Sergeant Major Carr, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself, and welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it. And so first off, before I go any further, before I even introduce or say anything about me, I want to wish Staff Sergeant Hicks a speedy recovery. And so I know he's amped and pumped to get back. We wish him a speedy recovery, like we do all of our warriors that enter. So I'm Sergeant Major Rocky Carr. I got the privilege to lead as the Command Sergeant Major, the Service Deployment and Distribution Command, SDDC, here at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. And I will tell you, I'm married, like you said. I'm a 92 Yankee by trade. I'm a 00 Zulu now, but 92 Yankee old supply sergeant by trade, and have enjoyed a career of sustainment and been enriched in that field since I've been in the Army. I'm married to also a soldier who's a 92 Yankee. And so she's a Master Sergeant Carr, the best soldier in our house. I leave the house every day, number 2 of 2. But I tell her all the time, I'm nipping at her heels. I'm getting better. But she's a great logistician and sustainer in her own right. And I have a whole fire team of kids, 3 of them out of the house. But Roxana and I have 2 ones here in the house with me, 8 and 4. And the reason I bring that up, Master Sergeant Green, is if you see one of them come in the background and I get in Kung Fu stance and I sweep the leg, don't say anything. It's just I'm just trying to get them out. They're subject to come in here. Again, I'm proud and I'm pumped to be here, man. Glad to be here and glad to have this discussion. Glad that you guys reached out. That's me in a nutshell. Thanks.
We're absolutely glad to have you here. But there's a little game that we like to play here at NCOPD Live called Quick and 60. So we'll ask you 12 questions, all right, in 60 seconds. And with those 12 questions, it's nothing hard, just really simple stuff. And if you have the right to decline it, you don't have to play if you don't want to, but no one has ever declined it. So I think the fans may be looking kind of funny, like, what's up with Sergeant Major? Why you didn't play the game? So
hey, we didn't even talk about this either. You didn't let me know this when we had the prep session. That's okay. All right.
We did.
I'm a warrior member of a team.
There it is.
I'm a warrior member of a team. All accounted for.
I think this is a good time. This is a good time to talk about something that we're going to talk about later about your Chuck Norris mentality. But okay, you can tell them about that later. All right.
All right.
Okay. So, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. The first question. The timer won't start until I finish the first question. Okay. What is your favorite color?
Blue.
Chicken or beef?
Beef.
Pasta or steak?
Steak.
What's your favorite vehicle?
BMW.
BMW. Okay. What was your favorite duty station?
Right now, every duty station is my favorite. You got to make the best everywhere you go.
Check, Raj. What was your favorite time as a non-commissioned officer?
As a platoon sergeant. I would tell you I grew exponentially as a platoon sergeant.
Okay. How many children do you have?
5.
How long have you been married?
13 years.
Uh-oh. Okay. Where are you currently stationed?
SDDC, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois.
Who was the last SDDC Sergeant Major?
Dana Mason.
You knocked it out.
5750? Hoa.
In there. Okay, outstanding. All right, so Sergeant Major, let's go ahead and get into it. Today, we definitely wanted to talk about leadership. So let's go ahead and get this conversation kicked off. Like, what was it that made you want to talk specifically about leadership?
Well, I think it's what we get the opportunity to do every day. And so, and we talked about it. I'm a sustainer by trade. but we're all leaders. That is one of the things that when you walk out the door, I call it parking lot leadership mentality too, right? So you walk out the door and you can't turn it on when you hit the parking lot at work, and you can't turn it off when you leave the parking lot at work. We're leaders, and so it's important to me. And then when you get a little long in the tooth and you've done it for a little while, as I go around and talk to soldiers, that's what they want to talk about. Hey, tell me about your leadership philosophy. What made you successful, and what is your view on leadership? And so, anytime I get the opportunity to talk about leadership and the great soldiers in the United States Army, I'm pumped. I'm in a 3-point stance and fired up, ready to do it.
I say, well, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it, Sergeant Major. So here,
Master Sergeant Green.
Please do. We are dying to see it.
Okay, so this, I call it, I mean, if you ask Carr, right, if we're just sitting on the street and you say, Carr, what's your leadership philosophy? How do you view leadership? And so this is kind of how I've kind of organized my thoughts and kind of grown as a leader since I first became a non-commissioned officer many moons ago. And so as I unpack it here, is again, just kind of my thoughts. They're a little bit messy, but if you bear with me, I'll walk everybody through them. And so my leadership philosophy and the foundation of leadership really starts with me with dignity and respect, and kind of fostering a climate of dignity and respect is so important because dignity and respect is the foundation when you first come in the Army. You have to respect and have dignity for everybody, whether you're a leader or not. You kind of got to have that as your foundation when you come in. And then that lays the canvas and the framework for you to build everything else you need. But you have to respect everybody, your left and your right. And that is the first building block, dignity and respect, of building mutual trust. And so it's important for me. And it's the first, as I put on there, get the ball rolling. This first start of getting the ball rolling is understanding dignity and respect, and fostering a climate of dignity and respect. And then you add on top of that standards and discipline. And the reason I put that in there is because we're in the United States Army. We're not in the Boy Scouts. We're not in the Salvation Army. We have standards and discipline so that we can trust the people to our left and the right. And I know, Master Sergeant Green, that because the Army has standards and discipline, I know that you can fire 40 rounds and hit a certain amount of targets because we have that standard in the Army. And so I trust that you're going to take care of your share of the enemy. And I know, Master Sergeant Green, that physically you're able to accomplish the mission because the Army has standards. And that also helps build mutual trust. And it also creates an organization that people want to be a proud of. Excuse me. And so the second ball there is standards and discipline. And then as you move to the right is compassion. And so compassion is a lens that I started using. I mean, I've always been a compassionate leader, but I really took notice as I became a senior leader and how important it was to have compassion and view soldiers and problems and instances of and opportunities for leadership with compassion. And I'll give you an example, right? And so as you go along and you learn regulations, and we quiz E4s, go into E5s, they go to the board and we ask them all these questions and they know the answer. I mean, they're right and left, they're coming down with the answers. They know black and white, they know the regulation. But what we charge leaders do, we charge leaders to understand a regulation and apply it in a way that takes into account dignity and respect, that takes into account standards and discipline, but also views things through a lens of compassion. Quick example is when I was in Germany before my duty station here, my wife and I are dual military, and I got to hustle like everybody else and get the kids to daycare, right? And so daycare opens at 6 o'clock in the morning and PT starts at 6:30. And as you can imagine, sometimes that's a tight window. You're trying to get your kids signed in, but you got to be at PT 10 minutes prior. Well, as the 21st TSC CSM at a 2-star level, I didn't have anybody breathing down my neck to make sure I get there. But I would pass soldiers in there. And they're E5s. They're a single mother who's trying to get her kid signed in so she can hurry just as fast as she can to get in her car and get to formation because somebody has said you need to be at formation 10 minutes prior. And so in doing that, and I get it, we got standards and discipline, but if we look at that through a lens of compassion, don't we as leaders have the capability or the ability to look at that and say, now, if daycare doesn't open until 06 and you're at 6:35, as long as you communicate with me, as long as we know that you're okay and you're heading in, potentially you get out of PT at 7:35 instead of 7:30, and we're going to be okay. Now, I'm not telling every leader out there to do that. I just use that as an example. We know what the regulation says and know it and live it, right? But look at things through a lens of compassion, and you'll be a more well-rounded leader as you apply that regulation. And then as the ball rolls along, you get leading from a good place in your heart. And so really, if you have dignity and respect, and your leadership is grounded and your very service in the Army is grounded in dignity and respect, and then you balance that because we're in the Army with standards and discipline, and you view those things through a lens of compassion, it helps you lead from a good place in your heart. And that's where we want to be. Leading from a good place in our heart helps us have a leadership presence that transcends whether you're personally standing in the formation or not. Your leadership presence outlasts you. It outlasts your physical presence, and it lets people endear themselves to your leadership style in a way that they want to follow. And that's what a leadership presence is. And so building all that and understanding all those factors and having a firm and a leadership presence that soldiers can follow, it helps you be a more well-rounded leader. And then I put up there some leadership considerations. I call them A2C2 because if you're in the Army and you don't have an abbreviation like with some stuff in there, you don't know what you're talking about, right? So I had to throw one in there, right, through my years of building this thing. And so you do have to be approachable. If soldiers are not going to bring you their problem, they're going to work around you. And again, that goes back to that trust thing. And you have to be authentic. Because if you're not authentic, you're fake, and they don't trust you to begin with. They certainly won't bring you their problems. You have to be competent, because if you don't know what you're talking about, they'll find somebody who does, or they'll find somebody who agrees with their point of view, and they'll go with that. And then lastly, you have to be caring, because it really all boils down to that, caring about things and your soldiers just as much, if not more, than you do yourself. And all that's my foundational leadership. That's my 3 or 4 minute elevator pitch. Man, I could talk about this thing for hours and would certainly be willing to answer any questions on it if anybody has it. But that's kind of how I approach every day, right? My random thoughts while shaving in the morning, when I'm knocking the whiskers to the inside and bite them off, because that's how tough I am. That's what I'm thinking about, right? I'm thinking about dignity and respect. I'm thinking about standards and discipline. I'm thinking about looking at things through a lens of compassion, and I'm thinking about leading from a good place in your heart. It's very important to me. It's very important for the A2C2, and I hope people get a little bit out of it too.
So we definitely got some questions over here, but before we go to the questions, I noticed you crossed out present and you wrote presence in. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Absolutely. So you see, you got a start point where we start with dignity and respect, and then at the end you would think where you are now. And I'll tell you, you're never done refining it, right? You're never done. That's a great question, my son. That's a hooah. You're never done refining your leadership style, and you're never done building on your presence. And so everything that you do every day, you audition and you get an opportunity to work on your presence, because again, it has little to do where you're physically at, where you're present at. It has much more to do with your presence, and that's the legacy and the feeling that you leave when you walk out of the room, right? And the feeling that you leave when you leave a unit. Are people better, and did they grow from your leadership? Do you make sound decisions and make people feel like they're part of the team, or do you make people feel like they have to kiss the ring? And that's all part of presence. That's a great question. I appreciate you teasing that out for me.
Okay, so let's go to our first question over here. Let's see. Here we go. Someone was asking about. Okay, here we go. Someone was asking if you could talk about the difference between doing what's ethically right and morally right.
Well, I think those two are inextricably linked. And so the short answer is you can do both. There may be instances where you think you're compromising one for the other. But I would tell you that if you, I see it on the screen now. Yep, I see it on the screen now. I think if you're leaning on your ethics, your professional Army ethics, and and your moral compass is pointing to true north, you can keep those in congruence. I think you can align both of those. If he wants to give me a specific example, I could potentially talk on it. I will say though, to his point, sometimes it's difficult, right? Because sometimes we may not philosophically believe with a direction that we may be going. We may not philosophically believe with the direction that a unit is going. But it's also important that we know if it's not illegal, immoral, unethical, and it goes to that ethical part, that we execute. But then we have a voice. As soldiers, we have a voice, and we have a way to make our voice heard. And so when we rumble about it in the barracks or we rumble about it outside, that doesn't do any good. But I will tell you, senior leaders want to hear your perspective. And if you think that the sounding board is not sounding right, they want to hear it. I know I do. And I know all my battle buddies in the nominative world. We talk a lot. And we are more attuned to what people think the organization, where people think the organization is headed than a lot of people think. It's just a lot of times people like to just nod their head yes and just go along with it because it sounds good. But most of the time, I think we can stay morally and ethically grounded and on true north.
Okay, here's the next one, Sergeant Major. I'm gonna pull it off the screen. I'll just read it because it covers you up. But and we'll go ahead and pull this slide down until we get to the next one.
Okay,
well.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, so the next question, well, maybe we're good now, was on discipline. They were saying that they hear a lot of seniors talk about lack of discipline, and they wanted to know if you could explain why you believe that statement to be true or false in today's Army.
Hey, everyone in every generation thinks they had it harder, right? They think that everybody that was in their generation coming up had it harder. I just think that's part of Army life. I mean, my father used to tell me, how he had to walk to school and all this stuff, and I'm sitting here thinking, but you didn't have to ride that hot bus that I had to ride. I got my own rucksack, Pops. I think that that's just inherent in nature and especially in Army culture, to where we think the last generation was tougher than this generation and is way tougher than the next generation. Let me tell you something. This is what I do know. I came in the Army in 1991. We had just finished the Gulf War. And so we weren't at war when I came in, and we had just finished that war, and I raised my hand, and I came in. There are people in our Army, and most of you that are listening right now, who came in while our Army has been at war. And I didn't have that burden, and you did. And so who are we to look at a generation who raise their hand when our Army is at war and say we're not as tough or you're not as tough? I think that's up to the individual. I'll tell you what I think is tough. I think it's tough doing morally and ethically right stuff like the last person asked. That's what's tough. The fact and notion that they're any less tough today than they were, I don't really buy that. I'm not a big subscriber in that. But I do love tough soldiers. Let me just caveat. I do love tough soldiers, but I think they're pretty tough. And if they're not, then that's something leaders can work on.
Okay, so he responded back, and here we are. So basically, soldier gets a DUI for taking a wife to the hospital, calls EMS, they're tied up, friends tied up, no one's answering, etc.
Soldier gets a DUI because his wife is in labor. So it could be a ethically or moral question. I would tell you that I don't know if you've been consuming alcohol, if that was a smart play or not, right? Because you just took not only the mother of the child, the prospective child being born, your life, and then any other life on the road, and so that's one of those questions that it depends on how drunk and everything if you're going to kill someone. But I would say I would have called 911 in that instance. Did he say the phones were down? Can you put it back up?
Roger that. I think he said EMS was tired up.
Called EMS. They're tired up. That's a tough one. I don't know what I would have done then. I would have tried to help my wife in some way, but I'm not a drinker. I do not think I would have got behind the wheel of a car. But I get the ethical dilemma there. There is an ethical dilemma there, and I would tell you that as a leader, if that would have came across my desk for UCMJ, The third step in my leadership philosophy would look at things with a lens of compassion. You cannot you maybe cannot look past the sin, but you can certainly help the sinner. To borrow to coin a term, we would be okay with that. We would find a way to right the UCMJ part, but DUIs are wrong, and we couldn't just look past it.
Roger that. So we got people putting in the inbox there, putting answers, like giving other advice, but we get the
point. Hey, Jeanette Duarte said Uber. I know Jeanette Duarte. You're right, Uber. But if I'm just playing devil's advocate, sorry, Duarte, in rural North Carolina, where I'm from, I don't think they have Uber. I think if you called an Uber, they'd laugh at you, or you'd have to give them an allotment. Over.
Right, check Raj. Okay, so I think this is a good time to talk about good old American famous Chuck Norris, the one and only.
Ooh.
So let me go ahead and pull your slide up, Sergeant Major, to talk about your Chuck Norris theory here.
The Chuck Norris mentality. Are you ready? Are you ready, Master Sergeant Green? Are you ready?
I don't know. It's pretty awesome. Everybody loves Chuck.
Listen, if you gotta love a good Chuck Norris joke, and so there's a Chuck Norris joke out there that says when Chuck Norris jumps in the water, Chuck Norris doesn't get wet. The water gets Chuck Norrised. And so I apply that. That's kind of how I look at when you have a problem set or driving the process. And so people ask me, hey, what's the secret sauce? What's the secret to success? Not that I'm that successful, but I made it this far, right? So they say, hey, Sergeant Major, how can I be a Sergeant Major? How can I make the next rank? How can I impress the leaders above me for the next opportunity? How do you do that? How do you get in a conversation? How do you be the lead on this next project and really impress your leaders? And it really transcends the Army. But here's what I've found. The Chuck Norris mentality, driving the process and happening to the situation. And so, in a nutshell, in the world of task conditions and standards, especially not leaders, but especially non-commissioned officers, our boots should be firmly on the ground in the conditions phase, right? The Army is going to give us the tasks and the Army is going to give us the standards, but we set conditions. We have the ability to get to the left of potential problems. We have the ability to set conditions so that we can affect the outcomes and the outputs of the thing that we're trying to achieve. And so you take a problem, and I got it there on the slide. You take a problem set or you take a task. And to really get after driving the process, you need to affect three things. And that's people, process, and products. You need to affect those three things. And I'll kind of go over those with you. So in the people, everybody knows it. Well, you should know 90% of mission accomplishment is crew selection. And so who you select to do a job or whom you select to do the job often dictates how well the job will be done. We in the Army are notorious for loading up our great soldiers, right? And meanwhile, there's a soldier in the corner of the office or the cubicle or the motor pool that's got a master's degree because we don't give them that much stuff, and they've been taking college classes, right? Or we give the ones that we know is going to accomplish the mission, the task, and it's our challenge to have 100% of the people doing 100% of the work. And so who we leverage, the people that we leverage is very important in the output that we accomplish at the end. And then you look at the product. What initiatives can you put in place that drive the behavior, drive towards those outputs? What initiatives can you put in place that moves the organization or moves your effort forward towards an end state? And it has to be specific, right? And then lastly is the product. What metrics can you use? What can you put in place to see if what you're doing is successful? What can you put in place to make sure that what you're doing is working and it's driving toward the end state and the output that you want? And all along in there, you see I have tempo, pace, and drive putting in those little arrows, because everybody knows when you do something quick, when you do something that is too standard and you do it quick, leaders automatically know that's the go-to person. And so everything we do, we ought to do with tempo and pace. We ought to drive the process with tempo and pace. If you know me, Mess on Green, if we ever work together, if anybody who's ever worked with me knows, if we're walking through the motor pool, I'm walking fast. right? If you're not stepping out, you're not keeping up with me. Because I have a theory that I'm going to get on my deathbed one day and I will have lived like a month and a half longer of my life and enjoyed that much enrichment because I got to the next place faster than everybody else did, and I was able to enjoy that much more of my life. So do things with tempo and pace. But let me unpack it a little bit for you. So under people. And so when I was a battalion CSM, and there may be some people on when I was a battalion CSM, we had in the BCT that I was in, I had a BSB, and we were dead last in our readiness stats. We were dead last in med pros. We were dead last in PT score. We were dead last in weapons qualification score, and dead last in those criterion that were being judged or briefed at the brigade meetings. And I was like, man, why? What is going on? And so I'm talking to my first sergeants, and they're great first sergeants, right? And the first sergeants are hammering the message, and we still could not move the ball down the field. And so, again, I've made a career out of driving the process. So I thought, where is the message? Where do I need to make the message more clear? And we figured out I need to empower platoon sergeants in that effort. The first sergeants weren't able to be everywhere they needed to be to empower that effort. And so we really worked at empowering platoon sergeants. And so what we did, and I'm not advocating anybody do this, we came up with this platoon sergeant at a quarter board. Where you didn't appear before the board. The only thing that appeared before the board was the outputs from your soldiers in your platoon. We made a big deal out of it. We gave an award every quarter. We brought the brigade commander down and gave coins. We put it on NCOARs. We got a big plaque made and put it in the centerpiece of the battalion conference room. And we made a big deal out of it, so platoon sergeants wanted to do it, and they wanted to achieve it. But every metric in that platoon sergeant at a quarter was every metric that we were trying to get after in our outputs and accountability. It was med pros. It was PT average. The first number in the platoon sergeant at a quarter board was your platoon PT average. The second number in the platoon sergeant at a quarter board was every person in your platoon that you had that was a marksman, you got 5 points. Everyone that was a sharpshooter, you got 10 points. And everyone you got that was an expert, you got 30 points because we want to award excellence, right? And so we drove the process by putting in place a program that specifically drove after the metrics that we were looking at. And then we held ourselves accountable. We looked at it, we measured it, and we held ourselves accountable, and we absolutely turned around. And within 2 sessions at a platoon sergeant at a quarter board, we were number 1 in the brigade in those categories. And I'm so proud of the leaders that did that because I didn't lead a single one. But I'll tell you what did happen. Platoon sergeants stopped waiting for first sergeants to schedule ranges for the company. They started reaching across the post there at Fort Hood to 3CR and other units going, hey, I see you have an M16 range. Can I send 3 soldiers to your range? And they would come back with a marksman and a sharpshooter, and they go, hey, you're going, the field artillery has a range in 2 weeks. You're going back. And so platoon sergeants, we empowered them to get after those metrics, and they drove that process. And we accomplished those outputs through accountability, through those metrics, and through leveraging the right people. I would tell you it's powerful. It's powerful when you can do it, and it's more powerful when you can do it with tempo and pace. Over.
So how did you influence the change in mindset in those platoon sergeants through the first sergeants? Like, how did you specifically do that?
So in the Army, it's common that we train 2 levels down. And so naturally, you're going to be on the scope, or the platoon sergeants are going to be on your scope if you were a battalion CSM. And then back then I was a battalion CSM. And so platoon sergeants were on my scope, right? And so taking into account that was the level in which I needed to empower them and get them moving in the right direction. And I thought I'll be perfectly candid and quite frank. I thought the first sergeants were all given the exact right message, but they could not set conditions at the platoon level, because in a BSB, you're in a maintenance platoon, right? And if you're an alpha company, you got a distro platoon. There's missions, and you have to balance a whole. But it's not like you can send everybody to the range anytime you want. And so I needed to empower and I needed to energize the people that could manage that on a daily basis, not on a training calendar basis. I needed the people to manage it on a daily basis. And so through the first sergeants and through that program and through that that view of training 2 levels down, we really got buy-in from those platoon sergeants. And I'll tell you, when you do that, when you get buy-in to the people, when you get 100% of the people doing 100% of the work, you're a powerful organization. But when you just have first sergeants out there, all right, we need to get better at med pros, I mean, it sometimes can be a little bit redundant, and people in the audience can hear it as white noise. I'll go one further. We didn't just reward that. We rewarded good behavior and kind of dinged bad behavior. And so if you got a CCIR for a DUI, you would get a demerit. But if you got somebody over at WLC, at the time it was WLC, now BLC, but if they got commandant's list, you got a merit. And so we had tangibles in there that promoted great behavior, and we had the people that could influence the behavior energized to do it, and it was very powerful. Thanks for the question.
Wow. Okay. So let's move into sustainment. I think you said that was the next thing that you wanted to cover was sustainment. So let's go ahead and move this slide out, and let's talk sustainment.
All right, great. Now I want to just take the opportunity. I saw Angelica Jarmula say Saber Pride on there. When I was a first sergeant, Sergeant Jarmula was in my orderly room, and I'm a dynamic NCO. So shout out to Sergeant Jarmula. I'm a fan of her work and love watching all my former soldiers still excel from afar. And I'll tell you, it brings much pride to me that they keep serving. So let's talk about sustainment, right? So Master Sergeant Green, what I wanted to do is I think most people in the audience are familiar with tactical sustainment concepts, right? We're familiar with log packs. We're familiar with the BSB concept. We're familiar with the sustainment brigade handshake from the CSSB to the BSBs, and the BSBs to the FSCs, and the FSCs to the warfighter. And we understand that very well. What I wanted to do is give us a little bit more of a 10,000 foot or a 20,000 foot view of sustainment and pull us up to the operational and strategic level and how we set a theater. And so, you want me to just go into it right now?
Go for it.
All right.
Go for it.
So
people want to know.
Hey, so the people have to listen, everybody out there in the land, listen, when you graduate the Sergeant Major's Academy, you authorize 3 war stories a day, or you get to pontificate for a long time. I haven't used any war stories, so I get to pontificate. I apologize up front. I appreciate your patience. All right, so here's operational and strategic sustainment, right? So when you're looking at setting a theater, you got several things that you need to consider, and really, it's based on first the O plan, right? Because the O plan, the operations plan dictates in your theater how you'll do the fight. And so this is not a secure medium, and we won't go into the O plan, but you have to have that in the back of your mind as a backdrop that you always are ready to set the theater from a perspective of the O plan. And so just understanding that first off, without getting into the O plan, I just want everybody to understand that there's an O plan out there. And in the O plan, there's an associated tip fid that goes to the O plan. And that's basically the flow of forces in the theater. And so for this instance, let's just say it's the next fight, right? Just say we would have a large scale combat operations and we had the next fight. If we had to bring a force in to fight World War III, and it ain't no World War III, but let's just call it World War III. And so what are those tasks that we would need to do to set a theater? And so previously, before I was the SDDC Sergeant Major, I was the 21st TSC Sergeant Major. As the 21st TSC Sergeant Major, we were charged with setting the European theater. And so from that perspective, I'll give you a couple of European lessons learned perspective on setting the theater. And it's good to see Renetta Clark out there in Germany in 21st TSC. And so the first thing with setting the theater is you have to understand freedom of movement. From a theater perspective, how do you get forces into the theater, and how do they go intra-theater on the bridges, on the roadways, through diplomatic clearances, and through the nations that will need to go into the fight. And so how do you achieve that? And how do you organize the movements of those forces by phase and by importance and by priorities in the O plan? And so you have to understand that. The next thing you have to understand is what ports do you have available to bring in the force, right? So you have in the doctrine a contact layer, a blunt layer, and a surge layer. When you start to bring in those that surge layer, where are you going to bring them into? How do you get them close enough to the fight to where they can move to the tactical edge at the speed of relevance? but yet far enough away from the fight so you can do those RS and OI tasks to get them into the theater, receive them, and integrate them into the fight. And so what ports, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the SDDC portion in a little bit. And then you got your tip-fid dilemma, right? And so the hardest part is doing the math. And so understanding the forces that you bring over and their consumption rates and what it takes to get them over. In no theater do you have enough to bring an army's worth of equipment over and have enough class 1 to feed that army, right? You have enough class 1 in the theater to feed the forces in the theater. And those are sustainment stocks or rotational stocks that you have to rotate anyway. Same thing with medical. You have medical stocks in the theater, but you certainly don't have enough medical stock to treat the entire army. And so how do you sequence those in the theater? What should you have in theater? What should you have in APS? And then what should you have CONUS that you can rapidly bring over? And the next thing is fuel. And so if you want to grind a fight to a stop, is not understanding bulk fuel. And so I'm going to use Germany, I'll use Europe as an example. When you look at Europe and the former countries that Russia used to have, the fuel line stops at the East German, the old East German, West German border. And so that NATO pipeline stops there. And so the crude that goes to those other countries are really coming from Russia. Or they're buying the crude from the best possible source. And so you have to understand if they cut that off, how do you get bulk fuel storage? What do you have to understand your backhaul plan? You got to understand all that. And then you need to understand Army support or other services. Special operations will be in your theater. But the main thing is the Army may not be the priority of support in the phase that you're in. And so just understanding that. I could go into all that. I don't want to bog down the discussion with that unless I get some questions on it. But really, those things are considerations you have to have, and you got to really drill down on that, and you really got to do the math. The math problem is this. It's you take a commodity, class 1. We'll use class 1 for an example. And how many do you have on hand, and how much class 1 do you have on hand in the theater? And then you look at your tip fid, how many forces are flowing by day into the theater. And so how much class 1 will that require? How much can you store and rotate through so you're not putting rations in the burn pit because they expired? And then you come up with a number, you come up with your theater stockage sites, and everything else you have to have CONUS, right? You have to bring that over CONUS because you don't want to have so much in theater waiting for a war that you're putting it in the burn pit or you're serving it for Thanksgiving because you don't want to waste the rations, right? So that's a small example. Class 8's the same way. Fuel's the same way. You don't have enough on hand to fight an entire war. And so doing the math and understanding how much you have in theater versus how much you can store in theater versus how much you'll need to bring from CONUS is a hard math problem to do, but you got to do it to set the theater. You got to do the math.
I got a question for you, sir.
Okay.
What advice would you give young sustainers when it comes to dealing with the left behind criteria?
What do you mean, the left behind equipment?
No, left behind criteria, as in like we go in, we do our thing, and these are the personnel that's left over that we may have to deal with when we're pushing supply trains and things forward. When you're saying you're leaving people behind as you move forward? No. The left behind criteria, like once our combat arms go through and they push forward and we're moving the supply trains forward, there's a left behind criteria of like, we have to take care of 75% of the bad guys and there's 25% left. That fluctuates.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you do it? Very carefully. I would tell you though that as you move. So the answer to your question is you have the Joint Security Coordinator. So the JSA, the Joint Security Area, has a Joint Security Coordinator. The Joint Security Coordinator has the responsibility of securing the Joint Security Area. And the Joint Security Area is really where you'd have that dynamic where you're at. And so, for example, in Germany, the Joint Security Area Coordinator, the Joint Security Coordinator for that theater is the TSC commander. And so without going into the O plan, there is a plan in the O plan that slices off a piece of combat element that would be able to take care of much of that security. But I would caveat it with this. Even securing the Joint Security Area, there's a priority to that, and it's a commodities-based priority. If it's those sites where we have stockage sites, or if it's a petroleum pipeline, or if it's commodities that help the war fight, they're going to be a higher priority. And so we, the metaphorical we, not you and I, but the metaphorical we in the joint security area, own a lot of that security ourselves. But there is each O plan has a portion of fight that is assigned to the JSA for the Joint Security Coordinator to use.
Nice. Very nice. Okay. So let's see if we got any questions over here. I haven't seen any questions come up yet, Sergeant Major. So if you want to rotate into the next section that we talked about. So I guess now we're to like what does the SDDC provide for the Army?
Okay.
If you can tell us something about that.
There. Okay. Hey, so the SDDC, right? Service Deployment Distribution Command is the Army Service Component Command to TRANSCOM. So we're an ASCC to TRANSCOM. At the same time, we're also a major subordinate command to Army Materiel Command. And so we have 2 4-star generals that we answer to. We're ADCON to AMC, and then we're OPCON to TRANSCOM. And so we're here co-located with TRANSCOM at Scott Air Force Base. And really the purpose of SDDC is to move, deploy, and sustain the armed forces to deliver readiness and lethality at speed. And we throw that at speed in there because really you can have the most capable fighting force in the world. And we do have the most capable fighting force. The United States Army is the most capable and most powerful force the world has ever known. But we're not fighting at all, and we're not maneuvering at all from the motor pool. Right? None of the fights are happening at Fort Hood and Fort Bragg. All the fights, if we're having our way, are happening away. And so all of them are an away game. And so the most capable force in the world doesn't help you if you can't move it and close with the enemy at the tactical edge. And that's what SDDC does, is SDDC moves and deploys the armed forces and sustains the armed forces through United States TRANSCOM, the COCOM that is responsible for the movement of the joint force. And then we ensure that the intermodal and the nodes throughout the continental United States are synced, pitch and catch with our nodes overseas. And we have transportation brigades across the globe that help us do that. And we have a deployment support command that is with us, that is in the reserve component. That's a 1-star command that helps us provide some depth. We call them the 2700, like the 300 movie to 300. We call them the 2700, and they help provide some depth. And so we're able literally to have an operational reach across the globe to set conditions to move the joint force anywhere in the world. And then you layer in that the rail mission, and again the rail. Now, if you look at rail is where the tactical army makes a handshake and meets the strategic lift at the railhead, right? That's where the tactical army of BCT goes, and they see surface warriors assisting at the railhead, and we put things on a train, and a train takes things to a port, and a port puts it on a ship, and there's a transportation brigade that is assigned to every port, and then we move it to the distant end, and then we have a transportation brigade in each theater that offloads and integrates that equipment into theater, onto a conveyance, and through to the tactical edge. And so in a nutshell, that's what SDDC does. We have some other policy things we do through the Transportation Engineering Agency and JDPAC, nested with U.S. TRANSCOM. But in layman's terms, we're the Joint Force Uber, man. Give us a call. If it fits, it ships. We'll pick you up.
Oh, that's awesome.
You got my joke, man.
Awesome.
I hope everybody out there got my joke, man. I can't see the comments, but I hope everybody got my joke. Joint Force Uber. You heard it here first. Trademark. Rocky Carr.
So here's the thing. Everybody's asking for the Chuck Norris slide. Everybody's asking for that slide to be shared. Like all the fans love it. They love it. They want the Chuck Norris slide.
Listen, you can share the Chuck Norris slide. Let everybody know that if you brief the Chuck Norris slide, you got to brief it in Kung Fu stance. It comes with the territory. But honestly, listen, send out the Chuck Norris slide, but honestly, think about it. Everything we do, you drive the process. People want results. People don't want excuses. They want people who knock. As a leader, when I have a soldier that works for me and I give them a task and they knock it out and it's to standard and it is done quicker than I would think they could get it done, in my mind, in my subconscious, I'm going, that joker's high speed. That is literally where the term high speed came from, right? High speed, right? That is literally the definition of high speed. Doing things the standard, quick, with tempo and pace. If you could do that, man, if you could drive the process and you happen to things and you don't let things happen to you, you'll be wildly successful. I made a career out of doing it, man. I made a career out of doing that.
That's awesome. Well, what we'll do is I will get those slides over to the professional SGL, and he will definitely get them to his team, and they will be hung on the site so that people can go ahead and get them. So the professional SGL, everybody's saying get well soon. He's definitely watching. He tuned in early and dropped some words in there.
Did he? Okay, good for him.
He did. He came on. He's definitely watching. He
Hey,
wants everybody to
Massar.
know he's doing good.
Hey, Massar, if he didn't see the whole thing, tell him the entire discussion was riveting and uplifting, and he missed it. And he needs to go back and watch it, man.
He's still watching. He's still
okay,
watching.
all right, just checking. All right.
Yeah, he watched the whole time. So is there anything else, Sergeant Major, that you had? I'm not seeing any more questions. We don't want to.
Hey, if anybody has any questions, I'm available to answer those. And that was all I wanted to talk about. Again, I could go in. Again, I can pontificate all night. Okay, I see you, Sergeant Hicks. Get well soon, man. We're pulling for you. I could pontificate all night. Those terms that I talked about and those concepts that I talked about on setting the theater. If you're a mid-level NCO or a senior NCO and you're not completely familiar with those terms, you're not completely familiar with doing the math in accordance with a tip fit and bringing forces into your theater and understanding what's on hand in the theater, what you can store in the theater, and then what you need to bring from CONUS, you got to be familiar with that. You can have too much, but having too much supplies in theater is a good problem to have, but it's a problem. It's like having too much money and not having a place to store it, right? And everybody walking off with it. It's a problem. It's a good problem to have, but by God, it's a problem. So yeah, understand those things. Understand that SDDC is the Joint Force Uber. If it fits its ships, man, give us a call. We'll pick you up. And we've got transportation brigades around the globe that can move, deploy, and sustain the armed forces. You let us know. And then I'll circle back briefly on the leadership thing. And maybe not a lot of questions, but I would tell you, if you can treat people with dignity and respect, if you can understand and underpin everything you do with standards and discipline, if you can view things with a lens of compassion, and you can lead from a good place in your heart, you'll build a leadership presence that endears you to soldiers, and they want to come to you for advice, and they'll want to come to you for feedback, and they want to come to you for professional development. And if not, if you don't have soldiers doing that, I would tell you to examine yourself a little bit, because people hit me up all the time. If they're not hitting you up all the time, examine how approachable you are, how authentic you are. But really, what is your leadership presence like? What do they talk about when you're outside the room? That's important. And then I would tell you, if I could leave you with anything, there's a couple of books I would recommend. Can I do that, Master and Green?
Absolutely.
All right, man. I should have came on here. I should have did this quicker. This is awesome. Hey, listen. Hey, there's a book. It's called Defeat into Victory. And it's by Field Marshal Slim. It's about Field Marshal Slim. And Field Marshal Slim is one of the greatest British field marshals ever. A lot of people have never heard of Field Marshal Slim. And so Field Marshal Slim was in charge of the China, Burma, India theater in World War II. And the book Defeat into Victory is really about self-reflection and AAR and your own failures and your own mistakes. And so what happened to Field Marshal Slim is the Japanese defeated Field Marshal Slim all the way across the China, Burma, India, Japanese theater. And they really, he just took loss after loss. But after every loss, Master Sergeant, he went back and he thought about things that he could improve, what he did right, what he did wrong, and he applied those in the next battle. And he would do a little bit better, but he would lose again. And he would go back and reflect, and he would apply it the next time. And when it was all said and done, Field Marshal Slim pushed the Japanese all the way back, defeated them, and is responsible for more deaths in World War II than any other field marshal. And it's because he was able to be self-reflective. He was able to understand that every time we don't have the right answer. Sometimes we need to go back, regroup, fix ourselves, and move forward. And I encourage people, Defeat into Victory by Field Marshal Slim. It's a good book on self-reflection. Another good book I would have any leader who would like to be a mentor, who has a mentor, want to understand mentorship, is a book, and it's a really thin book. It's a weekend read. It's called Gray Eminence. Now, I say really thin and easy to read book because if you're like me and somebody told me a book was easy to read and thin, that's the first one I'm buying. I'm all over. And if it had a couple pictures in it, even better. But Gray Eminence, and Gray Eminence is by a guy named Edward Cox, and it is really about Fox Connor. If you don't know who Fox Connor was one of the greatest mentors that the Army has had. Let me give you three people who called Fox Connor their mentor. President Eisenhower, when he was in the Army, General Eisenhower, General Patton, and General George C. Marshall. All three of those great leaders counted Fox Connor as one of their mentors. And Fox Connor, this book, this Gray Eminence, is really made up of his papers at the War College and a lot of the stuff that he wrote at the War College. And really, when Eisenhower did Operation Overlord, right, and he did up the O plan for D-Day, he packaged that thing up in a manila envelope and sent it to retired Major General Fox Connor in the Adirondack Mountains and said, "Sir, in your spare time on your back porch," and I'm paraphrasing, I don't know if he said this or not, but sir, as you're overlooking the Adirondack Mountains back there, we're planning an operation. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And Fox Connor marked on that and sent it back, and that's how much he thought of Fox Connor. And then the third book is a book called Brief. Hold on a minute. I'm going to show you Brief, right? And so Brief is a book by Joseph McCormick, and Brief helps you, especially for us in the Army, and I know I probably didn't show it today, but it helps you say more by saying less, and understanding the power of the spoken word, and understanding the power of influence. And it also underpins what I was talking about earlier about leadership presence. It's a really good book if you can get into it and really understand how to communicate on a very personal level. If maybe you don't have a huge speaking role in some of the work or some of the engagements that you're having. Brief is a really powerful book, and it gives you some hints and stuff, especially for the soldier. Really good book by Joseph McCormick called Brief. If I were sitting at home and I said, "Hey, I got to buy 3 books. I want to do some weekend reading. I want to do some COVID-19 reading." By gosh, man, there you go, right there. Those 3 would be good. I'll pause there, Matt Sarnt.
Okay. All right. Well, I know everybody's gladly appreciative of those books because I know I'm going to pick them up and I will definitely be reading them. Well, if there's nothing else, Sergeant Major, what we like to do is give the guests the last parting words, and then I'll close this out. Okay. Hey, so my last parting words is we have a lot of things going on in our country right now. COVID-19 hit us in the mouth, right? And we took a step back. And we reacted to COVID-19 and we put COVID standards and discipline in place. And as an Army, we have been in motion and we really have continued the mission. And that's what the American people expect us to do. And so I'm proud of everybody out there that is part of that effort. I'm proud of everybody who is hunkering down. I'm proud of everybody who is doing those things that we have to do to stay safe and those things that we know we have to do to support the warfighter, because there's today soldiers in harm's way, in the close fight, on the tactical edge, and we'd all be well served to make sure that we're doing our part. And part of our part is being safe under this COVID-19. And the other last thing is, in our country right now, there's some civil unrest. And it's brought about by racial injustice that we all need to be prepared to have difficult conversations about. And sometimes we got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And most of the time, we need to be prepared to listen. And so I just encourage leaders at echelon. You don't know everything. Be self-reflective and listen and have difficult conversations and tell your story. And for those around you, dignity and respect goes a long way. Compassion goes a long way. Standards and discipline goes a long way. Leadership presence. But that transcends the Army, and it goes into our communities too. And I just would encourage everybody to be great people in their community and be great leaders in your community, just like you are in the Army. I would pause there and thank y'all so much, and thanks so much, Staff Sergeant Hicks, for bringing me on or inviting me on. And remember, I want you to get well soon. #HUA. And that's all I got, Master Sergeant. Over to you. Over. All right, everybody. Once again, everybody, thank you for joining us here on NCOPD Live. This has been another great session. World, this is Richard Green. And as always, life is a choice. We're depending on you to choose well.